This is the second video that looks at the cognitive approach to depression. And like we said in the last video, there's two theories you've got to know. Beck's theory and Ellis's theory. We've already looked at Beck's negative triad, and now we're going to look at Ellis's ABC model. And we're going to start with the AO1, the theory behind his model. Ellis's ABC model states that depression is a result of irrational thoughts. So it's thoughts that are not considered normal. So depressed people have irrational thoughts that result in them getting depression. And an example of this would be if you were depressed after an exam. Ellis would state that it's not due to the exam at all. It's due to how someone thinks about it afterwards. It's due to their irrational thoughts as a result of the exam. The exam didn't cause it or cause the depression. It's the irrational thoughts that occurred after the exam that caused someone to become depressed. And there's three stages to Ellis's ABC model. A stands for the activating event. B, the belief that occurs as a result of that event. And C is the consequence. So what consequences occur as a result of someone having a certain belief. So this model shows what a healthy person in this column and a depressed person in this column would respond, and how the ABC model could explain why someone becomes depressed. So if we ever look at the healthy person, you might get a negative event. Someone's just lost their job, they've just been fired. So a healthy person would have a rational belief as a result of that. It might be, right, I didn't actually work as hard as I could. I probably deserved that. And as a result, we get this healthy negative emotion. We get something where, right, I need to work harder next time. Next time I get a job, I've got to put in my all if I want to try and keep it. A depressed person, on the other hand, would have the same negative event. They've been sacked from their job. However, they get an irrational belief as a result of it. They might be like, they always had it in for me. They always hated me from the start. So they have an irrational thought process there. And as a result, they develop an unhealthy negative emotion. They might develop depression because of that. Because they're thinking everyone's against them, that maybe they're worthless, that they're not good enough. And this unhealthy belief, this irrational belief, will result in negative emotions such as depression. So if we look at an example, again, someone getting sacked from work, they have the belief that they've always had it in for me, I'm useless. Depressed people get these irrational thoughts after an event. And the consequence of these irrational thoughts is depression. And that's the key bit, that belief. People who don't develop depression have rational beliefs. People who are depressed develop irrational beliefs. And those irrational beliefs result in consequences such as depression. And again, to use a relationship example. So the activating event, the A here, is the unpleasant event. You're being rejected or dumped by your partner. As a result, you develop an irrational belief. So it might be that you're valueless, you're worthless, you're unlovable, and that's why the person rejected you. And that can result in the consequence such as depression. So you've got this ABC model, these three different stages that we go through in order to develop depression. So let's quickly recap on what Ellis says causes depression. This irrational thinking, these irrational thought processes that are going on in someone's mind. And the ABC model, the activating event, the irrational belief, and the consequence that is depression. We're now going to move on to the AO3, the evaluation points, the strengths, the weaknesses, the studies to show whether this model is good or not. So Ellis's model has a lot of the same strengths and limitations as Beck's model. For example, it can be used in CBT. Remember, this is all about irrational thoughts. So in therapy, such as CBT, a therapist could use Ellis's model to challenge irrational thoughts, to try and change someone's beliefs. You're trying to change that irrational belief. If you can do that, you can change the consequence. You can remove the depression. So Ellis's ABC model, a great strength of it is that it gives a therapist something to work from. It allows them to change someone's irrational beliefs and help cure their depression. But very similarly to Beck's theory, it's an incomplete explanation. It can't explain everything. It can't explain the high levels of aggression. It can't explain the hallucinations, and it can't explain Cotard's syndrome. the feeling that some depressed people, in extreme cases, might feel like they're zombies. So it can't explain all aspects of depression. It can only explain certain ones. There's also an alternative explanation. We've looked at the cognitive explanation for depression, Ellis's model, we've looked at Beck's model, but there are other explanations out there. For example, the biological explanation. And it's been strongly suggested that low levels of serotonin, so remember serotonin is our feel-good neurotransmitter, the higher levels of serotonin, the better we feel. And it's been suggested that low levels of serotonin can cause depression. And many antidepressants that have been used with people are successful. So if you give someone a drug to change their biology, it can reduce the symptoms of depression. So the biological explanation must have a role to play. Serotonin is the feel-good neurotransmitter. Low levels of serotonin have been linked to depression. Antidepressants, the drugs, the biological treatment for depression has been shown to work. So there must be a biological explanation for depression as well as a cognitive. So if we have a quick recap then on the AO3 points for what you'd want to include in an answer on Ellis's model. It's only a partial explanation. Okay, we've got to try and include the biological explanation in there. That's got a role to play. It also can't explain hallucinations, anger, and all those other things we've discussed. It does have a practical application. That is a major strength of Ellis's model. It gives a therapist something to work from. It allows them to challenge the irrational beliefs of someone with depression. And it's probably an incomplete explanation. We do have to take that biological model into consideration. Serotonin, the role of antidepressants, has been shown to be successful in treating depression. So we do need to look at alternative explanations as well. So overall, one of the main limitations of both Beck's and Ellis's models are that we can't establish cause and effect. And what we mean by that is, does faulty thinking cause depression, or does depression cause faulty thinking? So we can't really establish which way round it goes. So the first one, do we develop this irrational thoughts and then that causes depression, or do we develop depression and then does that lead us to have irrational thoughts? And that's a major limitation with both of these models. We can't establish cause and effect. And some people also argue that irrational thoughts might actually be more realistic. Some people believe that depressed people actually have a more realistic look on the world. That the world is probably a more depressive place than we actually want to believe. And that the rest of us are actually looking at the world through rose-coloured glasses. So there is the potential that depressed people are actually those who have a more realistic view of the world. That everybody else is looking at it through these rose-tinted glasses, that everything's a lot nicer than it is. Whereas some people believe depressed people are perhaps the most realistic out of all of us.